everyone, I'm Sostine and welcome to my channel. Today we're going to be diving deep into 18th century sewing by making more undergarments and a redingote, or a riding dress, for a ball jointed doll, also known as a BJD. If you recall, over a year ago I bought a beautiful doll made by a Korean artist named Bimong and ended up naming her Evelina after the titular character by Francis Burney. I wanted a doll for whom I could make beautiful 18th century style accessories and clothing, since fashion dolls who had completely accurate but miniature wardrobes did exist in the 1700s and before. These dolls were dressed by the very same dressmakers, also known as mantua makers, stay makers, and tailors, and millinery artists who also made it for royalty. These dolls would then be sent across the world to different cities and countries so that other places could see what was in style and then emulate it. To be fair, these fashion dolls were quite large, around 24 inches, so definitely closer to the 1.25 or 1.3 scale than the 1 to 4 to 1.5 that Evelina is. One benefit to doing dolls this big is that you can actually get much more detail. Tiny embroidery and quilting, itty bitty lace and ribbons can be found on all of these dolls. For certain accessories, these dolls provide really important insight into the past. For instance, the only way modern historians can learn about originals is from paintings and prints, because oftentimes the only surviving piece of it is on these dolls. For instance, Lady Clapham, who currently resides at the Museum of Victoria and Albert, has one of the very few surviving fontanges on the planet. The fontange is the headpiece, by the way, and I think the only other surviving one is also for a doll, and that's the only real way that we know how they were structured. A really cool story about these fontanges is how they came about. In the 1600s France, King Louis XIV had multiple mistresses, one of them being the very beautiful Marie Angelique, also known as the Duchess of Fontange. Interestingly enough, he also had two other mistresses at the time, but Marie Angelique was just apparently very lovely and his favorite for physical things. While on a hunt with the king, her hair caught on a branch, fell all around her, and she used some ribbon to tie her hair in a way that was just beautiful, and it was much admired by the king. This hairstyle became all the rage immediately. The ribbon on the head got fancier and taller and is now known as the fontange. So isn't it just absolutely gorgeous on top of Lady Clapham's head? I really need to get into this era. I honestly love miniature things. I also build tiny doll houses and enjoy playing tabletop games. So seeing these small things made my heart flutter. All these tiny period details, like that tiny quilting on the petticoat, it just slays me. Now, before I get back to making the doll, let's take a quick snack break and take a moment to thank today's sponsor, Brightland. As much as I love fine goods and dolls and lace, I also love to eat delicious things. One of my favorites is to simply eat bread with a great olive oil and vinaigrette, or make lebna and eggs, my take on the classic Turkish comfort food, which is of course requires great olive oil. Brightland specializes in bringing you delicious, crisp, and just wonderfully flavorful olive oil. Brightland offers incredibly high-end olive oil made with the highest quality olives from local family-run California farms, and then pressed soon after picking with care. It has absolutely no fillers, additives, or artificial preservatives, and it's very obvious from the moment you taste it. Lebna is like a Greek yogurt, but it's thicker, almost with a cream cheese-like texture. Classically, you'll eat it with a drizzle of some rich, really flavorful olive oil and a perfectly fried or poached egg. This particular dish is so dippable with some olive oil, and the buttery flavor of Brightland's olive oil really complements the acidity of the lebna to perfection. If you like adding a spicier kick, I love to pair this same dish with a drizzle of Brightland's Ardor, which is Brightland's spicy chili infused olive oil. It has just the right amount of heat and goes well on everything, be it eggs, pasta, or just bread. There's something so wonderfully reassuring to indulge in a bit of gourmet olive oil. It makes every meal feel so luxurious, and it's really been a wonderful treat for myself, whether it's for a dedicated meal or for dipping the crust on some local pizza. If you'd like to try this, it's so good. Find out more about Brightland's high quality products by clicking my link. You can also get 10% through the link in my description. Thank you, Brightland, for sponsoring this video and making my lebna and eggs so tasty. So back to sewing. thing. If you recall last time, I did make a tiny pair of stays and some embroidered pockets. I said I would start on the rest of the gown soon. However, the next obvious step was to actually my least favorite, which is making the skirt supports. If this tells you how much I hate sewing underwear, I hire all of it out. I use red threaded for the corsets. I don't make bustle pads or skirt cages. I hire that out to amazing companies like Le Costumes de Jean. That is how much I hate doing undergarments. It had to be done. There's no doll-sized bustle maker out there. But let's talk about skirt supports for Evelina. In the 1700s, the skirt style and thus the skirt support as well really did change decade to decade, with some of the widest, most dramatic skirts being from this era. For instance, this pannier spans 80 inches. For Evelina's, personally, I wanted to go 1780s, so I decided to make her the most common skirt support from that era, a bum roll. Personally, I think that is a really flattering shape, and the skirt fall most romantically while also giving a really fabulous swoosh when you walk. This is made possible with the 1780s bum roll, and that's the one I purchased from Le Costumes de Jean, which is mostly made by a large quilted fabric on top of a pillow, which is shaped. It's still comfortable to sit in because it's like sitting on a giant pillow. There are other ways to get this look, including what's called a split bum roll, which is basically two smaller pillows tied together at the waist. At the same time, I really hate making this, so I actually procrastinated for a good whole year and then some. Finally, I decided it was time, and I would like to thank my friends Kelly and Christina for always pushing me to just finish the doll's outfit. To start, I needed to quilt the bum roll. Since I figure the doll is 1:5 scale-ish, I just measured the actual bum roll I had and divided it by 5. Since quilting by hand is tedious, I decided to just make an embroidery pattern by diamond shape using the Baby Lock palette software. I then gathered up the fabrics, linen for the inside, some cotton batting for the middle, and some silk taffeta for the exterior, since my doll deserves silk, you know? I then stitched it out in just a few minutes on the Baby Lock Venture embroidery machine. I, of course, used silk thread with my silk quilting. Afterwards, I cut this out and then hemmed the edges by folding it in twice after removing some of the batting where it was thickest. I stitched all of this down by hand, so it was mostly invisible. I then folded up the edge, pleating it by hand until it looked about the right size and shape for my doll. I had forgotten how easy sewing for a doll is compared to my other family members. I attached this to some cording, and then there you go, some skirt supports. I felt like I was on such a roll now, I decided it was time to make the petticoat as well. Traditionally, petticoats are used to smooth out the skirt shape, and I used some very light handkerchief weight linen from Burnley and Trowbridge for this. I cut out 2 rectangles, 14 by 9 inches, and then sewed them up at the sides, except for approximately 2 inches at the top to make room for the pocket slits. I then hand hemmed the bottom and pleated this to the top. I have multiple videos where I teach how to make this in detail. It was basically the same except in miniature, so it was much faster. Now it was time to make the gown itself. From the very beginning, I knew I wanted to make a tiny version of the 1780s embroidered redingote in the Rijksmuseum. I'd actually made this for myself back in early 2019, and while I love how it came out, there are some things I wanted to fix and thought that by making it in miniature, I could kind of play with it and see if it really did fix it. And I won't go into it here because it's all very theoretical, but I just want to say it worked. So I may remake that gown at some point. I confess I was somewhat intimidated by this whole project, but drafting for Evelina turned out to be much faster and easier than I thought it would ever be. I initially started by putting the days on Evelina, and then I used 1/4 inch paper tape to draw out the outline of where I wanted the seams for her redingote to be. I then used some cotton muslin to copy out the pieces. I cut it out and made a mock-up out of some cotton sateen I had around the house because it was pretty strong and I knew it would keep its shape. Now that I had the pieces, I scanned them into the computer and then I uploaded them into Palette 11, my digitizing software, and shrunk down my original embroidery pattern to fit. I had to remove some of the details in order for it to look good in miniature and for it to stitch out well since it would be too thick otherwise, which is a little heartbreaking at times, but I finally came up with a design that I liked that I felt kept the same details and feeling as the original. Once I had these pieces, I started sewing it together. Now, original 18th century garments are usually lined with linen. However, the fabric that I used, which was double-faced silk Duchess, was already so thick, but I chose not to line it. To do this, I cut out these pieces with a scant 1/4-inch seam allowance and machine stitched these together with a fine 1.5mm stitch. To keep it from fraying, I actually used fray check on all the edges on the inside. For the very front edge, I cut as close to the satin stitch as possible, with the silk stitching actually holding the edge clean. After that, I added in the sleeves. For the very front, I chose to close it with hooks and eyes, and to do this, I put the hooks behind the front on the right and cut a tiny slit for just the eye to stick out of. I stitched it in place. I then put the hook on the other side. Once I did this, I started working on the collar. The original has this 3-part collar. However, to make it somewhat easier, I drew up one large collar, scanned it into the computer, and then shrunk down the pieces I already had so that they would overlap in a way that would be really attractive on Evelina's scale. I also designed the cuffs. I stitched these out and cut them out and cleaned up the edges the same way. I then sewed it on. Now the dress was done. Honestly, it turned out so much faster once the underskirts were all done. So here's a quick dress up of the doll in all of her layers except for the shift, because I found that the shift made the doll sleeves way too bulky. You may have noticed that Evelina does not wear shoes. Sadly, I could not find a doll shoemaker who made 18th century shoes. If you know of someone, please let me know in the comments because I am actively looking. I am absolutely in love with her and I'm completely hooked on sewing for dolls. I actually pre-ordered another BJD who isn't here yet, but I think I'm gonna have to make that one an 1880s bustle look. I think the way her face looks just screams 1880s to me, so I can't wait. Thank you so much for following along. If you have a chance, please let me know who your favorite doll maker is because I'm always looking for other dolls to inspire me. If you like this video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up. It really helps with the algorithm, and please don't forget to subscribe if you haven't.